Growing up in rural Michigan wasn't a dream. It was isolation. 3 acres of land, trees as far as the eye could see, and silence. Too much silence. I was 13, and what happened one weekend still keeps me up at night. Let me take you back. It started like any other weekend. My parents trusted me to hold down the fort while they were gone. I was playing Vice City when suddenly, bang! A metallic crash echoed from outside. I ran to every window, my heart racing. Then I saw it. The door to the storage building out back was wide open. It was heavy, almost impossible to open by itself. What would you do? Would you stay inside and call someone? Or would you grab something to protect yourself and investigate? Let me know in the comments before we continue. I wasn't going to let anyone mess with my home. I grabbed the rifle and yelled, "Who's there?" Silence. I walked to the building, my finger trembling on the trigger. Every shadow felt alive. When I reached the door, I closed it and bolted back inside. I locked the house and stared at the building, waiting for the door to creak open again. Hours passed. Then I heard it, a creak from upstairs. My blood ran cold. Someone was in the house. I grabbed the rifle again and crept upstairs, each step feeling like thunder in the silence. 2 feet, bare and motionless. My stomach twisted. This was real. Someone was standing on the other side of that door. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Confront them or run for help? Comment below. I'm curious what your instincts are. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door. I whispered everything to the 911 operator. Then I heard it. Footsteps coming down the stairs. They stopped right outside the bathroom. I'll never forget that voice. It was deep, calm, and terrifying. I shouted, "I'm on the phone with the cops, and I have a gun." The operator's voice on speaker filled the room, and the man tried the door. When it didn't budge, he walked away. I sat there, shaking until the police arrived. They searched the house and confirmed he was gone. But it was my fault. I had left the door unlocked when I went to check the storage building. My parents sold that house 5 years ago. But sometimes I wonder, what if that man came back? What if he's still out there waiting for his next chance? What do you think? Was he just a thief, or was something more sinister at play? Share your theories in the comments. Subscribe for more chilling stories, if you dare. What would you do if a stranger called your name in the dead of night from the woods? This is the story of the most terrifying week of my life, one where every shadow, every sound, felt like it was watching me. Stay till the end, because you'll want to know how I survived. I was 18, home alone for the week, while my parents were away on an anniversary trip. It was summer, and our house sat deep in the woods, isolated with only a long dirt driveway connecting it to a quiet back road. Everyone in town knew each other, and life was generally peaceful. Or so I thought. It all started one afternoon at the gas station. I was filling up my car when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up beside me. The man who got out had a goatee and a strange, unsettling vibe. He greeted me casually, as people often do in small towns, and then asked for directions to the interstate. Something about the way he didn't use his phone to map the directions struck me as odd. Instead, he jotted everything down on a notepad, glancing up at me now and then. He asked if I was from around here, and I made the mistake of answering truthfully, "Yeah, I grew up here." He smiled and said my name was Lovely, after I introduced myself as Kate. Then he drove off, or so I thought. Have you ever had an encounter with someone that gave you a bad feeling, even though they seemed polite? Let me know in the comments if you trusted your instincts or ignored them, like I did. On my way home, I noticed the same Jeep Cherokee behind me. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, but when I turned onto my secluded driveway, he drove past, heading in the opposite direction of the interstate, where I had told him to go. That night I was heading out to meet friends. As I walked to my car, I heard footsteps in the woods. They were deliberate, too heavy to buy an animal. I paused, my heart racing, but convinced myself it was nothing and left. When I came back home hours later, the woods felt alive. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches seemed amplified. Then from somewhere deep in the shadows, I heard it. Kate. The voice was calm but chilling. My blood ran cold as I scanned the darkness. Who was out there? And how did they know my name? If someone called your name from the darkness, would you freeze, run, or confront them? Drop your answer in the comments. I wish I'd known the right thing to do at that moment. The next night, it happened again. This time, the voice was closer, louder. "Kate!" it called, taunting me. I ran back into the house and locked every door and window. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. The police came, shined their flashlights around the property, and told me to call if it happened again. But I could tell they didn't take it seriously. I tried to sleep, but every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The following day, I stayed inside. I didn't feel safe going out, but that night, I had work and had no choice. When I returned home late, the voice called out again. "Kate, don't call the cops on me again, cutie." This time, I screamed into the void. "You need help," before slamming the door shut. My parents told me to stay at a friend's house, and I agreed. I packed a bag and made my way to the car, but as I turned the key in the ignition, he was there, right outside my driver's side door, wearing a mask. He yanked on the handle, banging on the glass. My heart felt like it was going to explode as I sped off, barely able to breathe. What would you have done in that moment? Fight back? Stay locked in the car? Let me know in the comments. Your answer might save someone's life someday. I made it to my friend Alex's house, shaking and crying. We called the cops, who went back to my parents' property and found no sign of the man. When my parents returned the next day, I finally felt a semblance of safety, but the experience changed me. Looking back, I'm sure the man from the gas station followed me home. He knew I was alone and vulnerable. I can't imagine what would have happened if I hadn't left that night. I never saw the man again, but his face, his voice, still haunt me. What do you think his intentions were? Leave your theories in the comments, and remember, always trust your instincts. What would you do if someone rang your doorbell at night and refused to leave? This story will make you rethink ever opening the door again. It was one of those quiet nights. My family was away, and I had the whole house to myself. I was 15 or 16, deeply engrossed in my favorite game, StarCraft, the kind of game that makes you lose track of time and reality. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, twice. I froze for a second, the sound pulling me out of my gaming trance. Reluctantly, I got up and went to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice steady but my heart racing. A soft, shaky voice answered. "Please, I need help." Peering through the peephole, I saw an older woman standing on the porch. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide, and her hands were hidden behind her back. What would you do in this situation? Let me know in the comments. Would you open the door or call for help? I cracked the door open, leaving the storm door locked. "Can I help you?" I asked. She said she needed to use my phone and asked if she could come inside. Alarm bells went off in my head. My parents had drilled it into me. Never let strangers into the house. I politely refused, suggesting she try the library down the street. Her smile faltered and her tone changed. "That's very rude of you," she said, still smiling but now menacingly. I apologized and started to close the door, but she just stood there unmoving, her eyes locked on mine. Back in my room, I tried to shake it off and return to my game. But not even 10 minutes later, a clinking sound came from my window. Tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate, metallic, and chilling. My blinds were down, but I didn't need to see to know who it was. The woman had moved to my window. I muted my computer and sat frozen in my chair. The tapping continued. What do you think she was holding behind her back? Take a guess in the comments. Trust me, the truth is worse than you think. Unable to bear it anymore, I left my room and sat in the dark living room, trying to calm my nerves. The doorbell rang again, this time 4 rapid rings. My stomach dropped when I finally mustered the courage to peek through the door. It wasn't the woman. It was a man, maybe 10 years younger than her. "Have you seen my mother?" he asked through the storm door. I nodded, explaining she'd been at my door earlier. He apologized and claimed she had dementia and wandered off. For a moment I felt bad. Then he asked, "Can I come in for a moment?" I froze. Why would he need to come inside? I refused, suggesting he check the backyard because I'd heard noises there earlier. He thanked me and walked away. But when I checked the backyard moments later, it was empty. That night I tried to sleep, but just as I was drifting off, the tapping started again. I crept to the window, lifted the blinds slightly, and there she was, that same smile. But this time, she wasn't empty-handed. She was tapping a kitchen knife against the glass. I slammed the blinds down and crawled into bed, my heart pounding. The doorbell rang again, 4 times, 5, then silence. At this point, what would you do? Call the police? Stay hidden? Let me know your survival plan in the comments. A week later, I was dog-sitting for a friend. His dog, Theo, started barking wildly at the back door. I assumed he needed to go outside, but as I approached, I saw someone standing there. It was a man, mid-50s, disheveled and staring through the screen door. "Have you seen Melissa?" he asked, his voice slurred. Melissa was my friend's younger sister, but she wasn't home. I told him to leave and mentioned the house was covered in cameras. He left, but the whole encounter sent chills down my spine. When I told Melissa about it later, she had no idea who he was. This story is a reminder. Never open the door to strangers, no matter how harmless they seem. Always trust your instincts. Have you ever had a creepy encounter like this? Share your story in the comments. I'll feature the scariest one in my next video. I live in a quiet neighborhood with my older sister. We rent a small house and split the bills, which makes life easier. Last October, as the weather started to turn colder, my sister had plans to meet up with friends in Florida for the week. She invited me along, but I couldn't take time off work, so I stayed behind. It was just me in the house for a while. Monday morning she left, and I spent the day cleaning up and enjoying the peace. But something strange happened that afternoon. Around 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. I thought maybe it was a package my sister had ordered, so I opened it. "Hi, how can I help you?" The man standing at my doorstep was in his early 40s, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. He wasn't holding a package, though, which struck me as odd. He just stared at me for an unsettling amount of time, his eyes almost too intense. "I just wanted to see who lived here. Sorry to bother you." He smiled, nodded, and walked away without another word. I closed the door, unsure what to make of it. It felt off, but I brushed it off, thinking it was probably nothing. After all, it was a quiet neighborhood. The rest of the evening went by uneventfully, but the next day, around 6 p.m., after a long day at work, the doorbell rang again. This time, I hesitated before answering. I peered through the peephole, and there he was again, the same man from yesterday. He was wearing the same clothes, looking completely unfazed. I opened the door, just a crack, still wary. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He smiled as if my concern was ridiculous. "Of course, I'm just checking in on you," he said, his tone strange and almost familiar. "Checking in on me? Are you a neighbor?" I asked, thinking maybe he was one of those nosy types. But that didn't explain why he was being so insistent. "No, not a neighbor, just walking around," he answered, giving me an odd look. Now I was really creeped out. I quickly closed the door, hoping he would leave. I stood there, waiting for him to step off the porch before I felt comfortable going back inside. I texted my sister that night asking if she knew the man. She said no, that she had never seen him before. I felt paranoid, but my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. All the doors were locked, but I felt like I was being watched. The night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The next day, there was no knock at the door, no sign of the man. I started to think maybe I had overreacted, but the unease lingered. By the time it was the last day of my sister's trip, I had become hyper-aware. I stayed inside most of the day, reading and watching YouTube, but I kept glancing outside just to be cautious. Around 8 p.m., while I was watching TV, I heard it. Something scraping against the side of the house. It was a soft, slow sound, like a stick dragging along the siding. I rushed to the window and pulled back the blinds. I saw the bush beneath the window shaking. My heart raced as I heard faint footsteps running away from the house. Was it him? Had he been out there, hiding in the bushes, watching me through the window? My stomach twisted with dread. I felt a wave of nausea and immediately called my sister. I was talking so fast, trying to explain everything, but I think I was too frantic for her to understand. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Audience, what would you do in this situation? Would you answer the door, or would you hide and hope he leaves? Comment below. I didn't answer, but the man didn't stop. He started calling out, his voice sounding desperate. Please let me in. I'm hurt. I need help. He apologized for being outside, made excuses, and pleaded with me. His desperation was chilling. I could hear his knuckles banging on the door, louder and more frantic with every second. Let me in. Please, I'm so sorry. His voice was broken, almost pleading, but I knew better than to open that door. Something wasn't right. I quickly called 911, my hands shaking. The man continued to bang, trying to guilt-trip me into letting him inside. For 5 minutes, he wouldn't stop. His behavior was erratic, like a switch had flipped in him. Finally, he stopped knocking and left. The silence that followed was almost worse than his presence. I don't know what he wanted, or how long he had been watching me. It's almost too coincidental that he showed up when my sister was gone. Was he stalking me? Did he know she was away? Since then, I haven't seen him again. But the feeling of being watched hasn't left me. I still wonder, was he just a lonely man looking for help? Or was there something darker about him that I'll never understand? Do you think I was right to be scared? Or do you think I overreacted? What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It was just 4 a.m., and I had gotten an Uber back to my place after partying all night for New Year's. I didn't think I was plastered or anything, but I was definitely well beyond tipsy. A raging headache throbbed behind my eyes as the Uber dropped me off. I stumbled up to my front door, fumbling with my keys for what felt like an eternity before I finally got inside. The house was eerily quiet, almost as if it had been holding its breath while I was gone. I threw my things on the floor, grabbed an ibuprofen, and collapsed onto the couch. My head was pounding, and my body felt like it was shutting down. But sleep just wouldn't come. I laid there, eyes closed, hoping for some relief from the noise in my head. Suddenly the doorbell rang, not just once but repeatedly. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, over and over. It was the kind of ringing that would wake the dead, and yet I didn't get up to answer it. I was too tired, too disoriented. At that moment, I didn't even care. Whoever it was could wait. But shouldn't I have cared? Shouldn't I have gotten up to check? I mean, it's the middle of the night, and someone is ringing my doorbell non-stop. But again, I had been drinking. Maybe a little too much. I just wanted to sleep. Surprisingly, after a while, the ringing stopped, and just like that, I passed out on the couch. How long I slept, I couldn't say. But when I woke up, my head felt like it was going to explode. The house was dark, pitch black. I could barely make out anything. Stumbling to my feet, I groggily made my way to the kitchen to get a glass of water when something caught my eye, a streak of light on the wall. Even in my foggy state, I knew what it was immediately. The front door. It was partially open. Moonlight was spilling in, casting eerie shadows across the hallway. Was I so drunk I forgot to close the door? But then before I could make my way into the hallway to check, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps upstairs. My heart froze in my chest. I rushed back to the couch, ducking down behind it, praying whoever it was wouldn't see me. The footsteps moved above me, slow and careful, then stopped. The silence was deafening, and then they started coming down the stairs. What would you do if you were in my shoes right now? Would you stay hidden, or would you make a run for it? Let me know in the comments, and I'll tell you what happened next. The footsteps grew louder, closer, a pause. Then the front door slammed shut. The streak of light disappeared. A man's voice echoed through the house, breaking the silence. All right, let's get on with it. I was fully sober now, and the reality of what was happening hit me like a freight train. These men had just broken into my house. They'd probably gotten inside just moments before I woke up. And the worst part was, they had already checked the bedrooms upstairs. They assumed the house was empty. My chest burned as my heart raced. I could hear them moving around the house, rummaging through rooms, taking things, and chatting casually about I don't know what. It was all so surreal, like I wasn't even in the moment. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know what they'd do if they found me. These men had broken into my home and were treating it like it was their own. What were they planning? I heard them enter the living room. The couch was positioned diagonally in the corner, so I was mostly hidden behind it. But if they got too close, they'd see me. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't. I listened to them open every drawer, every box. Then one of them started walking closer to the couch. I could hear his footsteps coming toward me. Slowly, my heart skipped a beat. He was getting closer, closer, until his head appeared above the couch, peering down at the cushions. He didn't see me, though. He looked down at the couch, then moved on to the next room. I stayed perfectly still, like a statue. Time seemed to stretch on forever. 30 minutes passed, maybe more, of hearing them rummage through the house, going through everything they could find. Finally, I heard them leave. No words, no warning. They just took what they wanted and disappeared into the night. I didn't hear them mention coming back, but I wasn't taking any chances. I grabbed my phone and called the cops. Here's the thing, though. I thought I was just a victim of a robbery. But when the police arrived, they told me something else. A neighbor had seen 2 men watching my house for the past week, lurking around, acting suspicious. They'd probably seen that I lived alone. And when they noticed I'd left for the New Year's party without my car, they assumed I wasn't home. That's when they decided to break in. Thankfully, they only robbed me. Nothing more. But what if they had found me? What if they'd seen me hiding behind that couch? 5, 5, 5. Have you ever had a moment when you felt completely vulnerable, like someone was watching you? What would you do in a situation like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Well, they took the valuables, but there was something more. You see, they never took my phone or wallet, but they did leave something behind. Something that still haunts me to this day. It was one of those quiet, ordinary nights. I had just gotten off work and was looking forward to unwinding. My dog Hazel, a loyal companion, was beside me on the couch. The house felt calm. The only sounds were the flickering of the TV and the crunch of snacks in my hand. Hazel, as always, was content for the moment. But then suddenly she got up and trotted toward the back door. She stood there, her tail wagging, eyes fixed on the door like she needed something. I figured it was time for her to do her business, so I got up and let her outside. We had a small fenced-in backyard, nothing too special, just a simple area for Hazel to roam. Usually she stays out there for a while, sniffing the air, doing her thing. Tonight, though, she was acting strange. As I put away the dishes from earlier, I heard her bark. Normally, Hazel barks at squirrels, birds, maybe the occasional stray cat, but this time, her barks were urgent, more frantic. I walked over to the back door, opened it, and peered out. Hazel was standing by the side of the fence, barking into the woods beyond. There was nothing there, just dark trees, stretching into the night. But Hazel wasn't backing down. She kept barking as if something or someone was out there. I wondered if maybe she saw a coyote or something, so I called her back inside, locking the door behind her. I returned to the couch, but something was different. Hazel wasn't lying beside me like she usually does. Instead, she was sitting at the edge of the couch, her body stiff, her eyes locked on the back door. No matter how many times I called her, she wouldn't budge. She'd glance at me for a second, but then turn back to stare at the door, as if something on the other side was pulling her attention. It was unsettling, but I chalked it up to her being protective, as she sometimes gets. So I tried to relax and watch TV, but the feeling of being watched crept over me. I glanced at Hazel a few more times. Still nothing. Just her intense stare. Eventually, we both went to bed around 10:30, and Hazel, as usual, slept on the end of my bed or in her doggy bed in the corner. I left the bedroom door cracked open so she could go downstairs for water or food if she needed to. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, something felt off. The door, which I had left slightly ajar, was wide open. Too wide. I hadn't left it like that. I got out of bed, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. Hazel wasn't in the room. The house was eerily quiet. I listened intently for any sound, her nails clicking on the floor, the sound of her eating, but nothing. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right. I tiptoed out into the hallway. The silence was suffocating. "Hazel," I whispered. But there was no reply. I walked down the stairs, my heart racing in my chest. The living room was still. The food and water bowls were untouched. Hazel was nowhere to be seen. At this point, panic started setting in. Maybe I had left the back door open. Maybe she ran out and got lost. But no, I was sure I had locked it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I went to the kitchen and froze. There she was. Hazel was crouched underneath the dining table, trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes were wide with fear, staring directly at me like she had seen something I couldn't. I called her name again, but she didn't move, and then I noticed it. The back door was wide open. I know what you're thinking. Have you ever experienced something like this? When your gut tells you something is so wrong, but you can't explain why? What do you think happened to Hazel? Do you think she was trying to warn me about something, or was it something else entirely? The pieces started falling into place, but my mind couldn't make sense of it. The terror was starting to creep in. Someone had been in the house, and Hazel had known it before I did. My heart raced as I scooped Hazel up, feeling her body trembling against mine. I ran out the back door, through the gate, and across to my neighbor's house. It took a while, but eventually, they answered and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the house, but they found no one. However, there were signs, shoe prints, smudges in the dust around the house, even some leading upstairs. But the worst part? The part I can't shake. They were fresh. It felt like whoever was there might have been hiding, waiting for me to walk right into their trap. Now let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have stayed and confronted whoever broke in? Or would you have run too? Tell me in the comments below. The police didn't have any answers. I was left with more questions than I could process. Who had been in my house? Why had they opened my bedroom door? Were they hiding when I searched for Hazel? Were they still inside when I ran out? The truth is, I may never know. All I have now are the eerie, unanswered questions, and the unsettling feeling that someone, or something, is still out there, waiting for the next time I let my guard down. I can only hope it was a random intruder and not something worse. But deep down, I have this gut feeling that it's not over. Hazel, she knows something. She knows more than I do. And I'll never forget the way she stared at that back door. What do you think is really going on? Do you think Hazel was protecting me from something otherworldly? Or was it just a break-in gone wrong? Let me know in the comments, because I have a feeling this isn't the last time this happens. I used to live in a small town in North Texas, right near the Oklahoma border. It was one of those places where old, run-down neighborhoods seem to blend with the history of forgotten buildings. When I was 20, I ended up staying in one of those neighborhoods in an old, worn-out apartment complex with my girlfriend. The place wasn't exactly a palace, but it was all we could afford at the time. The area was known for crime, constant thefts, break-ins, and shady activity that seemed to always linger in the air. It wasn't unusual to hear police sirens late at night or catch a glimpse of someone running through the streets. But honestly, I wasn't too worried. Before that, I had lived in Oak Cliff, one of the roughest parts of downtown Dallas. So crime didn't exactly scare me that much. One night after work, I was in the living room reading a book called Shogun. I'd been lost in it for hours. After a while, I realized I needed to use the bathroom, so I reluctantly put the book down and stood up. The apartment had 2 rooms and a bathroom. Nothing special, but enough space for us. As I walked toward the hallway, something stopped me. My eyes locked on muddy footprints on the floor. These tracks weren't mine, and they were leading from the hallway toward the living room, right where I had been lying on the floor reading. Imagine you're in my shoes. What would you do if you saw muddy footprints leading into your apartment and you were all alone? Drop your answer in the comments. My heart started to race. I pressed myself against the wall, moving slowly as I followed the tracks down the hallway. The footprints led to my bedroom. That room was small, just a bed, a dresser, and a window on the back wall. I stepped inside, and it hit me. The footprints were clearer now. They started at the window, went across the bed, and then returned to the same window. The window was slightly open, the latch loose, as if someone had forced it. There were faint smudges of mud on the bedspread, where the person had stepped. My stomach sank. What do you think happened next? Did someone break in, or was it something more? I froze in place, staring at the scene, trying to figure out if the intruder was still inside. I spent hours walking around the apartment, checking every room, every closet, but no one was there. It was impossible, because the only way in or out of that apartment was the front door in the living room, where I had been lying just moments earlier. But here's the strangest part, and trust me, this is where it gets creepy. The blanket I had covering the window, the one I had pinned up to block it, was perfectly in place when I returned to the room. It was as if no one had touched it. Yet someone had to have opened that window to get in. They must have carefully moved the blanket aside, climbed through, and stepped into my room. They walked through the apartment, down the hallway, and all the way to the living room where I was reading. Do you believe the person was watching me? Or did they just leave without me noticing? The thought that someone might have been standing there, just watching me while I was completely unaware, still sends shivers down my spine. At the time, I was in good shape, and when I was lying on the floor, my back was turned to the hallway. I had no idea if someone was silently creeping up behind me. That night I didn't sleep. For weeks I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching me. My girlfriend didn't understand at first. She hadn't been there when it happened, so she couldn't grasp why I was so terrified. Eventually, she got frustrated with my paranoia and suggested we move to a new place. But I couldn't just forget about what happened. It took me years to get past it. But even now, I find myself wondering about that night. Why didn't the intruder come closer? Why didn't they do anything more than just sneak in? And how in the world did they break in without leaving a single trace behind? I still can't figure it out. What do you think? Was this a simple break-in, or was something darker at play here? It was about 6 months ago, on a quiet night, when something happened that I still can't explain. I was in my room, getting ready for bed. The clock read 10:30 p.m. My curtains were drawn, blocking out the outside world. As I put things away, preparing for a peaceful sleep, a sudden noise shattered the silence. Knock, knock, knock. 3 loud, deliberate knocks on my window. The sound was sharp and clear, as if someone were standing right outside. My heart raced. I froze, unable to move, paralyzed by fear. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but my mind couldn't process what was happening. It was as if the very air around me had thickened, making it impossible to breathe. A few seconds passed before my survival instincts kicked in. I bolted out of my room, my breath ragged as I rushed straight to my dad. I could barely speak, the words tumbling out in a terrified mess. Someone knocked on my window, I stammered, my voice trembling. I live with my parents and 2 brothers in a busy neighborhood, so hearing noises outside isn't unusual. But this was different. The knocks came from my bedroom window, not the front of the house. My window faces the backyard. For someone to knock there, they'd have had to walk through the yard, an area that's rarely accessed by anyone, especially at night. My dad, though concerned, didn't hesitate. He opened the curtains, but there was no one there. He stepped outside, checked the backyard. Nothing. Empty, no signs of anyone. I closed my curtains, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination or maybe an animal. I didn't want to overthink it, but that night, sleep didn't come easily. I felt uneasy, my mind replaying the sound of those knocks over and over again. The next night, almost at the exact same time, knock, knock, knock. I froze again, my stomach turning. It was the same clear, deliberate sound. Someone was out there. But who? I didn't waste any time. I ran straight to my dad, and once again, he came to check. He opened the curtains, checked the yard with a flashlight. But again, nothing. This time, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the knocking wasn't just an accidental noise. It felt intentional, too precise, too deliberate. I was too scared to stay in my room, so I grabbed a pillow and blanket and spent the next few nights sleeping on the floor in my parents' room. For a while, everything was calm. But then, about a week later, I was home alone. It was around 8:30 or 9 p.m. I was on FaceTime with my friend, chatting to distract myself from the loneliness. That's when it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. I jumped out of my skin. My heart pounded in my chest. Panic surged through me. Without a second thought, I ran to my parents' room to call them. They were out of town, and I was on my own. They suggested I call the neighbors to check outside. So I did. The neighbors checked their backyard. Nothing. That night I stayed up with the lights on, constantly looking at the window, waiting. But no more knocks came. But what if it wasn't just a coincidence? A few nights later, at 1 a.m., I was woken up by an even worse sound. This time, it wasn't just 3 knocks. It was a constant, steady rhythm, a deliberate knocking repeating itself. The sound was unnervingly persistent, like someone was deliberately trying to get my attention. For a brief moment, I considered pulling back the curtain to see who or what was out there. But something held me back. Fear. My body froze. Instead, I made my way to my parents' room, shaking. But when I woke them up, they were less than sympathetic. "It's nothing," they said. "Probably just the wind or a prank." I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. The knocking didn't stop. Over the next few nights, it became an unsettling routine. It wasn't every night, but often enough that I couldn't relax in my room anymore. Eventually, My parents decided enough was enough. They moved me to a different room in the house, an office space that was quiet and isolated. I thought it was over. For 3 nights, there was nothing. Peace. Finally. But then on the 4th night, it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. It was the same rhythm, the same sound, loud, clear. I was no longer just scared. I was furious. Enough was enough. I opened the curtains, determined to confront whatever it was. And that's when I saw it. Outside, crouched in the shadows, there was someone. A figure in a gray hoodie, blending with the darkness. Their face was hidden, but their posture was unnerving, still deliberate. I slammed the curtains shut, my heart hammering in my chest. I ran to tell my parents everything. They listened, growing increasingly concerned. After a long discussion, we decided to call the police. When the police arrived, they checked the area around the house. No one was there. The yard was empty, just as it had been before. There was no evidence, just my description. But they couldn't do much with that. They suggested installing security cameras. We agreed, setting up cameras the next day, one pointing directly at my window, and a few others around the property, hoping to catch whatever it was. But as I sit here today, I can't help but ask, who or what was knocking on my window? Was it someone trying to get my attention, or something far worse? What do you think? Could this have been a prank? Or is there something more sinister at play here? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. When I was around 16, my family lived in a worn-out house far from the town. It wasn't much, but it was home. We rented it privately, and my brother worked for the landlord to cover the rent. The landlord? He didn't seem strange at first, but that might have been because I mostly stayed inside whenever he came by to talk to my dad. I never felt safe around him until one day, things took a turn. One afternoon, my dad and brothers went out. Where exactly, I can't remember. I was alone in the house with only my dog for company. I stayed in my room, probably playing The Sims 2, lost in my little world. My room had a window that faced the long gravel driveway leading up to the house. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that feeling, like someone's watching you, even when you're alone? I know I sure did that day. I kept glancing out of habit, my dog barking in the distance, but I didn't think much of it at first. After all, we didn't get many visitors. Then I saw it, a car. It was driving up the driveway, and it wasn't my dad's. Panic hit me like a freight train. I ran through the house, locking every door, pulling the blinds down, turning off every light. My heart was racing. When I peeked out the window again, I saw it was our landlord. He lived about 2 miles away. That should have been the first warning sign. Why was he here, unannounced, again? This wasn't the first time he'd shown up without warning. It had happened twice before, both times when I was home alone. The first 2 visits weren't anything out of the ordinary, just brief and quick. But this time felt different. I could feel it in my bones. I grabbed a baseball bat. Yeah, the kind you keep in the corner of your room when you're alone. And I hid under the kitchen table. His car stopped outside. I heard the gate creak open. My dog was barking like crazy, making my heart race even more. I heard his footsteps, heavy, slow, getting closer to the house. Then he tried to open the front door. I was shaking. I didn't know what to do, so I texted my dad. "The landlord is here. He's acting weird." I thought maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe he'd just come to check on the house. But then I heard it. His voice. "Eleanor, I know you're in there. Why don't you come outside? I brought something special just for you. You don't want to keep me waiting, do you?" His tone was light, almost playful, but there was something off about it. A sinister edge in his voice that made my blood run cold. "Let me ask you, Have you ever had that gut feeling where you know something's wrong, but you don't know why? What would you have done in my place? Would you have gone outside? Comment your thoughts below because, trust me, if I had listened to him, things would have been very different. He stayed outside for at least 30 minutes, maybe even an hour. He walked around the house trying every window, every door. I heard his footsteps, his voice. He was determined to get inside. And then came the part I'll never forget. I know you're in there, Eleanor. Come outside. It'll be okay. You're not alone anymore. The words echoed in my head. He knew I was there. Alone. Finally, after what felt like forever, he left. He just walked away, like nothing had happened. By the time my dad got home, the landlord was long gone. I told him everything, every detail of what the landlord had said, everything that had happened. My dad didn't say much, but I could see the anger in his eyes. We moved out of that house soon after. But even to this day, I can't figure out how he knew I was home, alone. How did he know my name? How did he know I was alone in the house? Before we end this video, let me ask you one last question. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently? How do you think this story would have ended if I had gone outside? Drop your theories in the comments below. And remember, always trust your instincts. Because sometimes they're the only thing standing between you and something far worse. We moved into our house about 7 years ago, and from the very beginning, there have been moments that made me feel like we're not alone. I remember one of the first things that really shook me. It happened in the basement. I was down there searching for my tackle box. You know, the one with fishing hooks. Our house is split level, so the basement's partly underground. During the day, the sunlight shines through the windows, and I never bothered turning the lights on. Anyway, I found the hooks I needed and set the tackle box on the table near the closet. As I was putting it back on the shelf, I must have bumped the box of hooks. It fell, and the tiny hooks scattered all over the floor. I bent down to pick them up, and suddenly, the basement light turned on. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was around the time my husband usually gets home from work. I thought maybe he had come in, seen me struggling with the hooks, and turned on the light to help me out. But then I called his name, and nothing. I waited. Still no answer. I went to check the hallway. No sign of him. He wasn't home yet. I was alone in the basement with my dog, and that light had never turned on by itself before. And guess what? It hasn't since. Now the switch was flipped up, so something must have moved it. But what? The doors were still locked and there was no one around. So what exactly turned that light on? So here's a question for you, and I want you to tell me your thoughts in the comments. Do you think it could have been something paranormal? Or is there a logical explanation I'm missing? Let me know what you think. Later that week, I was upstairs, vacuuming the stairs. We have this heavy Electrolux vacuum, the kind with a big button to turn it on, and another switch to start the rollers. I had just finished vacuuming and turned it off, leaving it plugged in, ready for the living room next. I walked down the hall to switch the laundry, and out of nowhere, I heard the vacuum start up by itself. My dog and I froze. We both turned and stared at the vacuum from the hallway. No one was there, yet the vacuum was running, just like it had when I turned it on. But I hadn't. It had never happened before. And guess what? It hasn't happened again. What do you think? Could it have been some electrical malfunction or something else entirely? I want to know. Have you ever experienced something like this? An appliance turning on by itself? Or maybe you've had a creepy experience with a vacuum? Drop your thoughts in the comments. One time, my husband was home when something strange happened. We had just returned from grocery shopping. I was going to fill the dog's food and water bowls while he took the groceries to the basement. We keep the dog food in a small closet down there. I was upstairs when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was my husband coming down the stairs, but then he just stood behind me for a moment and then walked toward the food storage. I turned to ask him if there was more to bring down, but no answer. I walked around the corner. No one was there. I was alone, in the basement. Confused, I went upstairs to find my husband. He was on the other side of the house. I asked if he had been downstairs, but he hadn't. My husband, who never believed in ghosts, started to change his mind after this. One evening I was on the phone with him. I had just left work and called to check on him. He was talking to me when suddenly he went silent. Then he said, "Hold on, someone's here." I thought it was strange, especially since I didn't hear the dog bark. He came back on the phone and said, "I'll call you back. I just saw someone at the door." When he called back, he told me he checked the whole house, the garage, the outbuildings. No one was there, but he swears he saw someone outside, wearing a flannel shirt. Now, we live way out in the country. Our nearest neighbors are miles away. There's no one around, and certainly no one could have gotten away that quickly. If it was a person, they'd have to be hiding. But where? So my husband finally admitted it. Maybe there was something more going on than we could explain. But here's the kicker. The house itself isn't that old. Built in the 1970s, it's not ancient. We bought it from his family, and as far as we know, no one's ever died here. But there was an older house on the property before this one, and that house was torn down when ours was built. What do you think? Could there be something left over from that old house? Or maybe it's something more. If you had experienced what we've been through, would you stay in the house? Or would you move out and never look back? Drop your answers in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts.